Hi, I'm Dr. Trites with New Leaf Health and Wellness. If you're watching this video, you've either recently been diagnosed or you think you might have an autoimmune condition. This is going to be a rather lengthy video, but it's going to give you the information that you need to have on what we're going to do to make things better. Number one, what in the world is autoimmune disease? What if I just have autoimmune antibodies? We're going to go into the detail of that. Plus, the differences between traditional medical testing or functional medicine testing and the treatment protocol differences between traditional medical and alternative medicine. How did you get this disease? What are the things we do in our office to help you get out of it, whether it's food or possibly testing your genetics or even acupuncture? If there's a particular test that we want to recommend, people start to ask, well, wait a minute now. My grandmother had this, or what if my kids will have it? There's a way we can encompass the whole family to make sure that we're ahead of everything. So I will talk about the things that you do in your life that create inflammation, the things that you do that turn on genes, the things that you do that can turn on expression, meaning now you have an anti-inflammatory disease known as an autoimmune disease. And most importantly, what are we going to do in the office specifically to get over it, such as what's called functional or autoimmune neurology. It's very different than just somebody who has inflammation. When you have autoimmune neurology, it affects the nervous system completely different. Why? The immune system is run by the nervous system. And last, why you need structured treatments for this thing called mechanoreceptor stimulation and how vitally important that is to dampen the autoimmune response. So now that we have that, I'm going to start in section 1. Section 1 is, well, let's start a little bit about me. Autoimmunity is near and dear to me. Number one, I have had an autoimmune disease. I say had. And why I can say that is we have had testing such as a biopsy, which proves that you have an autoimmune disease, and the blood work that shows that you have autoantibodies, you're attacking yourself. And in my family, I also have a son who had a concussion. He also has my genes, and under those concussions, he ended up with an autoimmune disease. So it's really important to me to make sure that we know the mechanisms of what goes on. Now, he's still in the has phase because we haven't got him to the doesn't have anymore, it doesn't show anything. And we will get there. But these things take time, they don't happen overnight. So in my particular story, I started having trouble with my memory. And I was 33 years old, and memory has never been an issue. I could look at somebody's credit card once and I had that number in my head for life. And in the mid-afternoon, I was having trouble with names. This is not good, especially if you're in the medical field, because that's kind of important to remember what you're on. So I probably went to 30 doctors, as many of you have gone before, asking what's going on. Well, your electrolytes are off here, and well, you have this here. So I started doing some investigation. I had heard about autoimmune disease. Heck, my own grandmother had rheumatoid arthritis, and she was on 42 medications when she died. So I felt that maybe I should be looking into different things. So I did my own investigation. I ran my own food sensitivity test. I found that I was allergic to quite a few foods. And in the functional medicine world, most doctors start with food sensitivities. But here's the deal. That's not the mechanism. Food sensitivities are secondary to what's happening. So that's not a great test, but I knew that if I could take these foods out, I could at least start stopping some of the inflammation. One of the main foods I found I was allergic to was gluten, and I don't want to be beating the gluten bandwagon, but today I will talk about how gluten created such an epidemic of autoimmune disease. So as I'm going through this process, I learn more and more about what's going on. And there's a term that's called leaky gut. And before you go, okay, I'm going to turn off this video because leaky gut is just a bunch of BS. The real name for leaky gut, and I don't prefer leaky gut either, it's called intestinal permeability. There are over 200 clinical studies alone in the Journal of Gastroenterology on intestinal permeability. So before your medical doctor says there's no way you have a leaky gut, they need to read their own literature. That's just in the Journal of Gastroenterology. There's almost 4,000 studies on PubMed. So it's out there. It's real. It exists. When you have a leaky gut, you can also have a leaky brain. You can also have a leaky lung. So all those fun stuff, ADD, asthma, ADHD, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, even though there's different mechanisms that go there, all have permeable membranes, and that's in the gut and in the brain. So it's important to understand the mechanisms of what goes on with this. So my background, 25 years ago, I started on a scientific background. And I loved science, and that was where I was going to go. Whether it was pre-med, I was going to do something in that avenue. And I ended up in pathology. So the background was I started in school, and I got a degree in molecular and cellular biology. And what that means is if you don't have a PhD, you make between $6 and $7 an hour with a college degree. So I had to go back to school. Didn't do my research on that. And after another degree in anatomy and physiology and minors in chemistry and etc., I finally ended up in pathology as a clinical laboratory scientist. And anything that comes out of the human body that's tissue is something that we look at in the lab, and we give the doctor a confirmation. Does this have disease? Does this not have disease? All done by pathologists. And we, as clinical laboratory scientists, fell right underneath the pathologist and would more or less do the testing for them, and they give the final diagnosis. So that was where my background started with this. So whether it had to do with this type of testing or that type of testing, when the functional medicine world started doing what we call alternative testing, things that weren't necessarily run in the medical world or called the standard of care testing, I used the combination of these two value systems for knowledge to find out, has this been tested or not? Is this a positive, or what we call false positive, false negative test, or not? And it's not taught in the functional medicine world, false negatives and false positives. It's not taught in the medical world if you're at 99.9% of something that you should do something about it until it gets to 100%. So we have to combine the two informations to get from one point to the other. This is what I'm good at for my patients, is finding out what can we test, what are we going to do with the information, and how are we going to correct your situation. If you have an autoimmune case, you're not alone. In the United States right now, there are 70 million people who have an autoimmune condition. It's estimated there's double that actually have an autoimmune condition, but they haven't been properly tested to find out if they have one or not. So you think about that, 150 million people out of 350, that's a large amount. But really, we're going to get into that. What is that autoimmune thing? I'm sure you've heard of rheumatoid arthritis or lupus, but did you know that diabetes and osteoporosis are also autoimmune? That's right, osteoporosis. And that puts me on a bandwagon about osteoporosis. We're all told if you have a blood or a osteoporosis or a blood or bone problem, we probably should go take some calcium. So my first question to my patients are, have you ever seen a big bull walk over to a heifer and bend over and start sucking? No, doesn't happen. So where does this big bull get its calcium from? Green leafy vegetables. What milk does from a calcium standpoint, it grows an animal to about 2,000 pounds in a little over a year with a low IQ. And the calcium that's in milk is calcium carbonate. That's another name for chalk. So for those of you who are old enough to remember chalk boards we had, chalk as opposed to magic markers, that's what that is. It's very hard to digest. Here's another thing we have against calcium. When you put calcium into the body at high amounts, it's inflammatory. Not only that, it's neuroinflammatory. So if you have an autoimmune case that's run by the nervous system, not telling the immune system what to do, and now you put more inflammation into the nervous system, you're going to create more of an autoimmune problem. I hope that makes some sense to you. So what really is autoimmunity? It comes down to a loss of tolerance. You have to know what is self and what is not self. In the immune system, there really are two pathways. One that says, oh my gosh, that's not me. Let's make an antibody to it. And the other pathway that says, we got to kill it. So when you have an antibody and what's called a killer cell, then that's what destroys tissue. So if you make an antibody to yourself, the other part of the immune system goes, well, that's not me, so it must go and destroy it. In order to be diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, you can have something called autoimmune antibodies that we can test in your blood. That has to be confirmed with a biopsy that the tissue is actually being destroyed. There's another term other than autoimmune disease called autoimmunity. This is not autoimmune disease, but you are making the antibodies. It's only a matter of time before you have the autoimmune disease, but it is in a pre-autoimmune disease phase. That's the difference between what's called T1 and T2 on the immune system. So you have a loss of tolerance. That's what it is. You don't know yourself anymore. One of the biggest things that creates a loss of tolerance is called increase of hemoglobin A1C. Now, in your bloodstream, you have a percentage of sugar that stays on your blood cells. and it usually has to be around 5.5%. If it gets above 5.5%, this is like caramelizing your food. So if you're barbecuing or you're making caramel, however part of the country you decide to say that, it is actually changing the chemical composition of your food. When that happens, that gets too high and it creates inflammation. Well, in your body, it creates this thing called albumin glycosylation. And when that happens, your body does not know if it's you or someone else. So there are 120 different autoimmune diseases. This is a mechanism that gets the ball rolling, but that's not it. You could have an imbalance of hormones. You could be exposed to environmental toxins. There was a lady by the name of Erin Brockovich that brought a lot of that to light. You could have an imbalance such as an immune system that's low. You tend to get sick all the time. Well, what about viruses, bacteria, fungus, yeast, parasites? You live in a moldy house, you have a moldy building. Those can get in there and cause a loss of tolerance to the immune system. There are even medications. For instance, the reason why anybody who is on an anti-epileptic drug has to go in and have their blood test every single month is because epileptics do affect the liver, and the liver creates a loss of tolerance. So that's just one class of drugs to get things going. So in 2005, the New England Journal of Medicine said that the patient who is affected with healthcare is most likely to receive a third to half of the treatment that they deserve. And this is one of the main reasons why. Because when you're looking at an autoimmune case from a medical standpoint, you have to wait until the disease step takes place. For instance, they do not treat in the Autoimmunity, they wait until it's an autoimmune disease. And this was the case for me. As I went in, I found that I had a thyroid condition. Thyroid condition is known as HASHIMOTO'S. But when it's called Hashimoto's thyroiditis, the medical world says it's a thyroid condition. As we went back, we had talked about autoimmune disease is an immune problem that's run by the nervous system. So everybody's trying to treat me from a thyroid condition. It's my thyroid's fine. But my immune system is attacking my thyroid because my nervous system doesn't know who is what. Is that you or is it not me? So I'm going to attack it anyway. So the conventional approach is to do nothing, wait until there's a problem, provide an immunosuppressive drug. Now keep in mind, I need to have an immune system to do stuff. So if my system is now immunosuppressive, then I can't fight off those other things that create autoimmune disease. This is why so many autoimmune patients end up with what's called autoimmunity, meaning you had one autoimmune disease, now you got another, and this can go on and on and on. So we decided to take a different approach with me. I wanted to find out what caused it. Was it genetic? There's some of that. Was it environmental? There was some of that. Was it previous medications as a child? Yep, some of that. I had everything. Okay, what are we going to do to fix it? So we look at the mechanisms. Going back to mechanisms, remember my leaky gut? I'm allergic to all those things. If we don't fix the mechanism within the leaky gut, and we take all these foods or substances that cause inflammation out, in 90 days, those will all be better. But guess what? I'm allergic to 300 or 400 other foods that are out there because I still have my lack of mechanism. So our approach to you in the autoimmune world is to look at the mechanisms at place that are turning this on and turn them off.